Controversial video game is hitting store shelves.
One of the most violent and gruesome video games ever produced.
This game is so violent, even the store manager is warning his customers.
Rockstar has always been head of the table when it came to controversies. And while it's still considered an edgy company, time has definitely declawed them into a household name.
And it's from a studio that has a near-perfect track record.
But during the early 2000s, Rockstar really carried its controversies with pride. GTA 3 stirred things up like no game had before.
It's 3 words: Grand Theft Auto.
It quickly established them as the bad boys of the industry, something that they would not only embrace, but also capitalize on, leading to the straw that ultimately broke the camel's back. That's right, it's Manhunt. Yeah, that's what the point of the mask is. But Manhunt was never really on my radar. I knew of its history and its controversy, but since I used to be a little wuss, horror games were not something I was excited for. And while not necessarily a horror game, Manhunt's controversial dark and gory elements had me a little concerned. While I could justify the harsher elements in GTA for the fun story, the seemingly deliberate focus on edge for edge's sake didn't sit right in my tiny rat brain. To me, it was the game equivalent of the 2000s gore porn horror movie craze, which ruined all horror in the mid-2000s for me. So despite that shiny Rockstar on the box art, I always skipped it. And the closest I ever came to playing it was when a friend invited me over for a Manhunt session, only for it to be Hitman, a different game about a bald psychopath. Yeah, we were all a little special back then. But after that, Manhunt never really occupied my mind space. That is, until now. Today, I'm a lot more jaded, faded, and outright dated, so Manhunt doesn't cross any more boundaries like it used to, which means that after 20 long years, it's time we find out, is Manhunt still controversial? Act 1. Things start off a little cryptic as we're thrown right into the middle of a conspiracy that sees us taking the role of one John Manhunt. I'm kidding, though I wish it were true. We're actually James Earl Cash, a recently executed death row inmate who just happens to be very much alive.
Hey, tough guy, wake up. You're not dead. Well, not yet, anyway.
Cash wakes up dazed and confused, and under the direct mercy of a sadistic snuff director by the name of Lionel Starkweather.
I'm your only way out of here. Hey!
Starkweather makes it very clear that if we're to survive the night, we're gonna have to go a little crazy, and maybe even a little stupid, as we're told to indiscriminately murder everyone and anyone who gets in our way, with our opposition being the countless Carson City gangs. It's no picnic, but it sure beats lethal injection any day. So we start our night out slow as we make our way through the back alleys of Carson City, where we face off against the Hoods, the smallest and weakest gang in the city.
As far as you're concerned, they're meat.
They're mostly made up of common street thugs and apparently hitmen, which just gives more credence to my confusion as a kid. And while it's never implied in game, there's always been a common belief that the Hoods are actually off-duty cops, which not only makes sense with the design, but it also adds some extra grime to the universe, so it's part of my headcanon too. Now, right off the bat, the controls really stood out. My man Cash is a walking tank, if tanks were dyslexic psychopaths. Not only can moving be pretty damn cumbersome, but the funky camera just makes things way worse. Let me explain. If you want to move the camera in third person, you need to either be moving or holding right bumper, which makes you sprint, so that's not recommended. Because if you try to look around while holding still, it turns first person, which wouldn't be too bad if it didn't also invert the camera. No matter how many times you change it in the settings, first person will always be inverted, making for some wonky getaways. Now, honestly, I do commend the actual game controls for what they were trying to do, because it's definitely a lot more fine-tuned for stealth with special movements like leaning and a default speed that can only be described as a leisurely stroll. And it would probably work really well if the cameras weren't so shit. I mean unique. But with Starkweather in our head, we're forced to indulge in some psychopathic tendencies, which sees us going for executions. It's the game's main mechanic, aside from stealth, and what you're going to spend most of your time doing. Executions, like the name implies, allow players to perform brutal and graphic stealth kills on enemies. They range from suffocations with a plastic bag to overly gruesome bludgeonings with various weapons, some focusing heavy on the genitals. Each weapon has 3 levels of executions, with the amount spent stalking determining the brutality of the kill. Similarly, there's also 4 classes of weapons, and we'll go over them really quick just so you get a sense for the gameplay. Starting with a throwable, which are used to distract the hunters. Then you got your small items like glass shards and plastic bags, which can only be used once, but are pretty much silent. Our medium class is the most varied and includes things like sickles and hammers. They make some noise, but it's pretty negligible. Lastly, we got our heavy weapons. They make a lot of noise and do a lot of damage, and range from a wooden baseball bat to a full metal M16. It escalates pretty quickly, as you're about to find out. Surprisingly, some of the weapons have alternate uses like crowbars, which not only kill, but also open, adding some sense of strategy to the weapon choices. So that's pretty versatile. That being said, open combat is highly discouraged, with stealth almost always being the right answer. Despite that, I'm an impatient rat. So I was brute forcing my way through just every encounter. And while there's some definite pushback with the difficulty, it wasn't enough to make me change my ways. Little did I know, that was about to change. Because we managed to survive the hoods, only to be jumped and bonked by Cerberus.
He's already dead.
There's Starkweather's personal security and our private transportation, taking us from one snuff scene to another. Oh, fuck. Thanks for the ride, assholes. Leading us to scene 4, where we're introduced to the Skins, a very Anglo-Saxon centric group with a heavy focus on keeping things clean. Oh, I'm sorry, that's as cleansed. Ironically, they're a minor player in the scheme of things, as Ramirez is shown to be Starkweather's man on the ground and a potential thorn in our side. So, we're dropped off at the junkyard, where I hit a metaphorical wall. A Jason wannabe who probably punches just as hard. I assumed I could force my way through, like I had been before. But, turns out Jason is there to teach you a lesson. A lesson that almost made me drop the game.
Don't.
It was seriously close, but I resisted because if I learned anything in my 26 years on this hellhole, is that sometimes you just gotta go with the flow. So after getting my ass pounded, wait, that sounds bad. After getting utterly railed, nope, that's just as bad. After learning my lesson, that's better. I ended up embracing the slower and more methodical executions. And ultimately, I found my morbid curiosity getting the best of me as I started going for every execution at least once. I swear I'm not a psychopath. Making stealth and patience an essential. So rough starts aside, the Skins went down a lot smoother now that I knew what I was doing. There were some game-breaking glitches when it came to the crane in scene 5, but that was just the emulator shitting bricks and not the game's fault. So by the time we finished off the Skins, I was starting to understand, not just the mechanics, but the appeal as well. Creeping around a gang-infested city, triumphing over insurmountable odds, just feels good. It also felt familiar. Which brings me to a little side tangent on The Warriors. One of my favorite movie games ever made, also developed by Rockstar. The Warriors came out in 2005, a good 2 years after Manhunt. And to my surprise, in retrospect, it borrows quite a few elements from Manhunt. Mostly the locations and game mechanics, which, ironically, the stealth sections reminiscent of Manhunt were generally my least favorite part of The Warriors, just because I wasn't the biggest stealth fan. That being said, I find the evolution and improvement of the game mechanics from game to game to be interesting enough to mention. But I digress, because our night is about to get wild, as we're dropped at the Carson City Zoo, where we have to face off against the War Dogs. They're a paramilitary style gang ran by Ramirez, making them one of the better equipped groups in the game. Which would be bad in itself if it weren't for the fact that they got your family tied up behind the cages. As far as the story goes, there hasn't been too much going on aside from trying to survive the night, so having this super personal objective, along with the implications that our family background is a little toxic, was just what I needed to keep me engaged. This was the point where I suddenly started to care a lot more about the story. Technically, you only need to save one of them to pass the mission, But again, it felt so personal that I spent a good hour saving all three. A good deed that would not go unpunished. This scene also gives you access to some new weapons, with guns making their debut. The revolver and double barrel both come with only a couple shots, making them a light introduction. I know the game gets some hate for its over-reliance on guns, especially in the second half where they play a much bigger role and definitely overtake stealth, but personally the guns might be my favorite part of the game. They all feel real and powerful and do some serious damage, with most enemies going down from a single headshot. They're a blast, especially the shotguns. But we'll get more into the guns in a bit, because things only escalate from here as our efforts to save our family were all in vain, when Starkweather shows us a special tape made just for us. We only see one of them in the tape, but it's safe to assume he had our whole family killed. Yeah, turns out you can't really trust a snuff-directing psychopath to let your family go. This understandably sets off Cash, giving us a new reason to get through the night. Now it's personal. This was also the first gun-focused scene, the first of many, and like I said, I was all for it, because the gunplay actually lends itself well to the faster, more modern-day playstyles that you would see from a boomer shooter like Doom or Wolfenstein. With that said, you know damn well I took a very aggressive approach that had me rushing them for headshots, which were always a guaranteed with the hard-hitting autolock, especially in some of the later missions where they throw a crap ton of enemies at you, which makes running and gunning not only a blast, but totally viable. Now, despite our new acquisitions, we're still in no position to argue, so it's business as usual as we go back to making snuff for Starkweather. This takes us to the best spots in Carson City, like Skid Row, where we run escort, the graveyard for a spooky high time, the chem factory for shooting, and of course, the Carson City Insane Asylum. Yeah, Cash can't catch a break, not even from Cerberus, who at this point have cost us irreparable brain damage. At this point, things were starting to feel a little repetitive, especially at the asylum where they take you back to the basics once again. You see, Cerberus takes your equipment every other scene, so I think I was hitting a breaking point. And I know it's the developer's way of managing difficulty, but I'd just rather keep my stuff. But thankfully the second half was all guns, so I started blasting. We managed to get out just in time to star in an Alice in Wonder parody that has us chasing down our very own White Rabbit at the Darkwood Penitentiary. We're supposed to die here, but considering we have a thing for evading death, I don't think it's gonna happen.
What can I say? You are a good leading man. The audience will love you.
The rabbit chase has us running all through the penitentiary as we put down waves of smileys. They're a special gang, emphasis on the special, which makes them kinda relatable. We're all a little special after all. But this scene is a fast-paced fever dream that has you running around like a Doom guy, blowing up heads left and right. It's a chaotic good time, with the chase ultimately ending with one dead rabbit and Cash escaping the prison, but not before paying back Cerberus for their hospitality. This ends the first act, which might have overstayed its welcome by about 3 scenes, lasting a total of 13. There's 23 scenes for reference, but I'd be lying if I said the rabbit chase wasn't an exhilarating way to end our time working for Starkweather. Work is in quotations. Act 2. The second act more than makes up for the slower pace of the first, and is by far my favorite, housing some of the better story beats in the game, along with changing the player character dynamic, as we, the player, take over directing duties, making Cash not only a direct reflection on us, but a dynamic character that changes depending on how we choose to characterize him. Or at least something like that, I don't know, I'm kinda dumb. But with that being said, this scene took me for a loop when we're immediately recaptured by Ramirez.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Try to roll away. Bring me that gas.
And with direct orders to put us down, this should be game over, but Ramirez pulls out a cliche, giving us a running head start.
Not. It's our turn now. Run! Run!
Obviously, we're the masters of hide and go seek, so it turns into a massacre that has us flushing out Ramirez from an apartment building where he's being holed up.
This isn't a game.
It isn't a game.
Climbing the tower isn't too hard if you take your time blowing some heads. Damn, why does everything sound wrong? Climbing the tower isn't too bad if you take your time, but it's the climb down that really does a number, since Ramirez runs down in a panic which has every war dog coming out of the woodworks. Not that it matters, because we quickly double back, blowing all their minds in the process, Ramirez included. The recapturing had me expecting Cash going back to making snuff, but to my surprise, it was just an opportunity to tie up loose ends. The war dogs don't take Ramirez's death lightly, so we hightail it out, only to be hit by a familiar looking woman, who turns out to be the same reporter who witnessed our execution. Yeah, she's kind of noticed the whole discrepancy with us not being dead, along with the citywide snuff ring, so yeah, she's ready to blow the lid on the whole operation. While hesitant, we form an unexpected alliance just in case. And now, I hate to do this, but the voice acting for Cash is pretty damn rough. Especially when he starts yapping for more than a sentence. It kind of hurts to hear.
You can bring him down, this Starkweather? Okay, let's go.
Huh?
To your apartment. Drive!
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Still, I love it though. So, despite this scene being another escort mission, it immediately stood out to me, and is probably one of my favorite in the game. You see, prior to this, we had been doing Starkweather's bidding, which meant indiscriminately killing for snuff. But out here, with the reporter, we're dealing with cops in the open public. Not to mention, there was no one pushing us to kill. This is where I started thinking deeper about Cash as his own character. What would he do in this situation? Is he really a killer by choice, or is it circumstances? Yeah, the stakes felt completely different, and for the first time, it felt like you could decide who Cash is, adding this subversive layer to the game that I wasn't expecting and got me totally immersed into the story. I get it now. That being said, it is the early 2000s, so it is a pretty underbaked sentiment, since on a gameplay level, we're still forced to take them out. I did try going for the quick and painless, but as you can see, things quickly escalated to a full-out manhunt. That was the joke of the video. Make sure to leave a like, or John Manhunt will get you. And of course, there's still the whole star rating, which totally incentivizes going for the kills. So by the time we get to the reporter's apartment, we're blasting cop brains all over the place. We end up ditching the broad at her place, where she has the evidence she needs to bring Starkweather down. But since the system has failed us before, we decide to take matter into our own hands.
Everything I need is in that box under the table.
Good. Take it and get out of town.
But you're not coming with me?
This was a really fun mission as far as escorts go, and not at all tedious. Look at the kitty cat! But leaving a trail of red, white, and blue, we continue our trek to Starkweather, leading us into the subway. Things only get harder for Cash as the SWAT joins in on the hunt, bringing in some new weapons to the mix. Weapons that we immediately put to use. What ensues is a cop killing spree that would make ACAB blush. Yeah, it turns out I left my reservations behind in the last scene. Our solo rampage only lasts for 3 scenes, with the Metro giving us some Mad Max Payne vibes, with Mac 10s and all. Followed by some train yard trouble, again reminiscent of the Warriors, minus the gore. We eventually get surrounded by the Fuss, who gets double crossed by Cerberus.
Whoa, what?
As they're tasked with bringing us back alive to the Starkweather estate, which fortunately for us is exactly where we need to go. The fuck, a cop with a camera?
What the fuck is this?
That's what I'm saying. This puts an end to our solo career and the second act. And while it was short, it was one of the most action-packed and mentally engaging parts of the game. The gunplay did get a little repetitive, especially with the amount of cops they threw your way. I swear, I become desensitized to the color red. Admittedly though, going head to head against the whole police force really embodies the whole idea of a manhunt a lot more than the smaller gangs. So, I'm all for it. Act 3. Act 3 starts off hot as we catch a glimpse of our little reporter friend bringing down the law of exposure.
At this point, it is unclear as to whether or not he will ever be allowed to direct again.
And not to be outdone, we get there just in time to start some trouble. Trouble that conveniently doesn't start with us, as we're literally flashed by a cutaway to Pigsy, a psycho killer within the estate who happens to be breaking free right this moment, making for an easy escape. This is the perfect time to mention a small gripe I have with how the game handles transitions, which is very poorly. We seem to jump from place to place in no cohesive manner, with most scenes ending with us getting bonked for immediate transportation. I guess I should give the game credit for at least trying to connect the locations to story, but again, everything is very convenient, which brings me back to Pigsy, who we can only assume is going to be a problem later, but we'll cross that conveniently metaphorical bridge when we get there, because we have a mansion to infiltrate. And with everything falling apart around him, things don't stay quiet for long. By the time you get to the mansion, it's a full-on shootout, with everyone and their mom packing M16s. Yeah, this is definitely the hardest mission in the game, especially if you're an impatient rat like me, who kept rushing in and ultimately dying. In a way, it's very in line with the early 2000s Rockstar games, but it felt a lot more manageable than GTA 3's Espresso to Go, so I will take that any day. It's definitely possible to go for a clean run with some good RNG, but most of the time, you're better off slowly moving up while popping heads. And that's definitely what I did after learning my lesson. I died countless times going for the rush, and while I was using an emulator, I tried using save states as little as possible. So, for the most part, I did try to suffer my way through it. You know, for immersion's sakes. But after massacring their defenses, we creep our way inside, only to hear we're not the only ones bringing down the house.
We can't be safe with these two bastards running around. We're on it, sir.
So, we use the chaos to our advantage and make our way through the estate. The tight indoor corridors make rushing viable again, so this was a nice stroll compared to the border patrol we had to face outside. We clean house, leading us to the server's big cheese himself. I think I bugged out the scene by going too fast, but in the end, it gave us the opening we needed to unceremoniously get him back for all the previous bonks. This is also where we get the key to the Starkweather estate, which would be great if there wasn't still a psychopath with a chainsaw running around. But still, we escape once again by the hair of our chinny chin chin, leading us to the ultimate face-off, killer versus killer, which had me realize Pixie is actually the perfect character foil for Cash. Where he gave in to Starkweather, losing his mind and humanity, Cash is able to resist and take back control. So, chainsaws aside, it's more of an inner fight against Cash's own psychopathic tendencies, representing what could be if we were to give in. But surface level analysis aside, Pixie is technically the final boss fight, and while not technically hard, it definitely gave me some trouble. You see, I got lost. You're supposed to sneak attack him 3 times, with there being exactly 3 single-use weapons hidden within a maze-like arena, and for the life of me, I couldn't find the last one. Come on, no. So I resorted to an old trick for an old dog and checked a YouTube guide. Nothing ever changes. And I'll admit, while mechanically a simple fight, it was a really fun one too. There were a few points where Pixie genuinely startled me, not to mention the atmosphere was just right. So yeah, this fight, while expected, was a lot more exciting than I anticipated. Unfortunately, I hate how we finished things off, because after our 3 executions, we then have to lure the big boy to some loose grading, which wouldn't be too bad if you didn't have to do it twice, because at that point it just feels a little redundant. So we trim the fat, cutting Pixie out of the equation. And freeing us for the final meeting with the producer. This would be the end, but curiously we get one more fight, which takes you back into the Pixie arena. And I can't help but to draw more parallels, since we pick up the chainsaw a little too similarly to Pixie and start butchering and dismembering our way through the last of Cerberus. It could just be the developer's way of letting the players enjoy the chainsaw before the game ends, but more likely than not, it's meant to make the player aware of their own compliance and indulgence in graphic content, since Starkweather hasn't forced us to engage in brutal executions since we offed the rabbit, making any brutal act committed thereafter our own. Or something like that. I don't know, I'm just a stupid dog. We bust into the main office, pulling a skull kid and totally gutting Starkweather. It's a pretty brutal scene, though I wish it would have been a little bit more hands-on. Oh shit, I really am psycho.
Cash, I
But with Cash out of sight, we finish the night with one last report, recapping our little escapades and bookending our time in Carson City.
In what investigators are calling a bloody vendetta, an unknown assailant infiltrated the compound, killing Starkweather, but more interestingly, leading police to the site of a snuff film ring being run from the estate's confines.
This might be it for Cash, but our time with Manhunt isn't quite done. Because like a lot of those early 2000 games, it's filled with a bunch of free extras for our little brains to enjoy, all which are unlocked by getting stars during the game. Starting off with the usual concept art, which gives some really cool insight into the gangs and characters. Of course, there are also cheats that unlock the same way, but still need to be punched in to activate. Unless you have an emulator, but I would never do that. And last but not least, there's 4 extra scenes that, while not story relevant, add some replayability to the game. There's Monkey See, Monkey Die, which is a rush mode, and probably the most fun. It really had me going ape. Laugh track. There's an extra encounter with the hoods that could have totally been in the main game, but probably didn't need the padding. Then there's the brawl game, which has you go hand to hand against endless waves of enemies. And lastly, Hard as Nails has you pretty much do the same thing, but this time with a nail gun. Not my cup of tea as far as challenges go, but you gotta give credit where credit is due. They're giving you extra stuff, not something you would get for free nowadays. The conclusion. In the end, Manhunt was a lot better than I expected. It took a few missions to get into the groove of things, especially with the extra long first act, but once things got going, well, they didn't stop, and you didn't want them to stop either. Everything was set up really well and paid off even better, with every antagonist eventually getting theirs and the media finding out the truth. The story, while minimal, is also presented in a really unique way, trading missions for scenes and making that VHS style a recurring focus that not only lends itself well to the creepy in-game atmosphere, but it becomes part of the story too. The VHS overlay intensifies the voyeuristic nature of the game, presenting Cash's time in Carson City as a series of snuff films, with the player being nothing more than a willing spectator, or in layman's terms, a fucking creep. Yeah, it's pretty meta when you think about it, but then again, I might just be high. Like all the high-end GTA connections that I can't help but to love. Yeah, I ran out of transitions, bite me. From the reused models to the way weapon pickups spin on the ground, it feels and looks like GTA. Where it really differs, and I think shines, is in its mechanics, which, janky for modern audience, were fine-tuned and varied, focusing on stealth and traversal more than combat. Even the camera being placed closer to our character adds to the claustrophobic feel and visceral nature of the game, putting us right in the action. I know I complained about the stealth earlier, but realistically, that's just a bad modern take on an old game, because for the time it was made, it was doing something special. Mixing stealth with survival horror, all under an ultraviolet GTA lens, it was a winning combination that riled up just about everyone. Which brings me to the point of the video. Is Manhunt still controversial? Absolutely, in the sense that it's actually a really good nuanced game and not just gore porn like I first thought. And while it definitely caters to that psychopathic tendency, it also makes you question your role as an active participant. Now, content-wise, it can get pretty gruesome, both physically and mentally. The executions, for the most part, really did a lot, and I'd be lying if I said that the morbid curiosity didn't get the best of me. You definitely become desensitized to the gore the further you go, but then again, there's something about seeing a head get partially blown off that will never not be shocking. You never really get used to it, and overall, Manhunt has the potential for brain rot. Not Skibidi levels, but being exposed to ultraviolet materials and concepts like snuff, especially at a young age, can be just as bad. Hell, even the fact that every scene takes place at night, that just can't be good for your mental health. Okay, that's a joke, but it does get a little depressing. So even after 20 years, Manhunt still has some edge, and while no longer controversial, it still stands as one of the most gruesome games out there, and the staple of what made Rockstar the punks of the gaming industry back in the day. It feels experimental, and not something I ever see them doing again. So, I'm glad it came out when it did, and I'm glad I didn't play it as a kid. Alright, that's it on Manhunt. It was a gruesomely fun and meta experience, and I'm glad I played it. Yeah, let me know how you guys feel. Is it one of those games you always wanted to play but never could, or were you a spoiled brat and got to play it when you did? I'm kidding. Let me know your experience down below. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more retrospectives and dumb garbage like this. Stay poochy, and with that, I'll catch you on the next one. Do you see my ass? I forgot I'm not wearing pants. Fuck. Kill, kill, kill. Murder.